Well, you saw the beginnings of functions and some of the basic information about using functions. Remember also that one of the major reasons for using functions is so that you don't have to repeat yourself over and over again. You write a function once or somebody else writes it for you, and then you can use the function again and again without making your program any larger. It's just like a subroutine if you're familiar with other languages that use that, where you can do a go sub, and you go to the subroutine and perform the work and then return back to the caller. That's the same thing that's happening with a function. Now, functions returning non-integers. When we looked at functions before, our func 1, 2, and 3, they were going to return ints, whether we said so or not. Now, in the new ANSI C, and that's from 1990 and later, so it's not so new, but we still call it new style coding. If a function is not to return anything, it will be declared as being a void type. If you don't declare the function type at all, that's an integer type. And if you want it to return something that's not an integer, like a float or a double or a long double, you have to say so. You have to tell it that. So void functions don't return anything. An undefined function can possibly return an int, not necessarily has to return an int, but could, and that's to allow older C programs to still compile and work properly. Let's take a look here at a couple of different function declarations, not definitions. Remember, the function definitions actually have the braces and all the statements in there. These are declaring these functions ahead of wherever they might be used someplace in the program. Here we have function A, and it is declared to be an integer return type, which we didn't really have to do, but it's good programming practice to put that on there so that you or somebody else can look at this program down the road and understand that func A will actually return an integer. Here we see that func A takes in an integer, and for conversations, we'll just call it A, that it's going to be A. It doesn't necessarily have to be that in the code, but that's to give ourselves a placeholder here. It'll take an integer, a character, and a float. And if you call it and pass it other things, if you put other types in there when you actually make the function call, those other types will be typecast to these types, because it's going to assume that you knew what you were doing when you were declaring the function. Here we have function B, and it's been cast as a float, so that when func B does a return, the value that is returned will be a floating point value, and whoever is calling func B and catching a value like x equals func B in the call, x has to be a float, and has to be willing to catch this floating point value coming back here. If x is not a float, the recipient of the value from func B, then it's going to get, the return value is going to get stripped off, because it's going to be typecast from a float and stuffed into an integer, and that's going to strip information off of it. And here we have our same values that we had before. Now here, func C is not allowed to take anything in, and it's not allowed to give anything back. And if you attempt to use func C and call it inside your code and send it something in here, some value, the compiler will flag that as an error because you're messing up. You said that this is a void, so nothing should go in there. You said that nothing will come out, and if you do a return of any value out of func C, that will also not compile and will be an error, and that's C trying to protect you from yourself. So to get a function to return a non-integer, you simply have to declare it as returning something other than an integer at some point before you actually define the function or attempt to use the function.